Hello, everyone, and welcome to Game Day Central. I'm Gina Mizell, Sixers beat reporter for the Philadelphia Inquirer, joined by my colleague Keith Pompey. I am live at the Wells Fargo Center, where in just a few hours, Ben Simmons will play in Philly for the first time since last season's lengthy holdout and trade from the 76ers to the Brooklyn Nets. On the court, this game has lost a lot of luster because Joel Embiid, James Harden, and Tyrese Maxey are all out with injuries. Still, we are all expecting a hostile environment tonight at the Wells Fargo Center. Let's get started. Keith, this is a game that we've had circled on our calendar since the NBA schedule came out in August. There's been a lot of anticipation around Ben Simmons' return when he will actually play in a game. He obviously was back here last March, shortly after the blockbuster trade, but did not play in that game and did not play for the Nets the entire rest of that season. But just given everything surrounding this game, you were in Brooklyn a couple days ago to talk with Ben Simmons before he came back to Philly. Just overall, what are you expecting inside the Wells Fargo Center tonight?
Well, I mean, the one thing you said, of extremely hostile environment, I expect that still. I mean, even Ben expects that. But I do feel like that is we're going to see a Ben Simmons show. I mean, when you look at people on the team, you ask yourself, the Sixers rather, who is out there who can guard them? And I don't see anyone out there who can guard Ben Simmons. Then what that's going to do is that could lead to him taunting the crowd. That could lead to the crowd getting even more upset. And I think that this is going to be a made for TV type of event to where we're going to see Ben Simmons having a good time with a great back and forth with the fans.
Absolutely. And just as a reminder for those of us, or for those of you who are watching, you are welcome to submit questions or comments in the comment section below. If you're watching us on social media, please go to inquirer.com/Sixers Game Day to do so. Yeah, it's going to be really interesting because that game back in March that we obviously knew that Ben Simmons was not going to play because he was still hurt, still dealing with some of his mental health situation, but he sat on the bench. And there were times where you just could see the kind of the smirk on his face because his team was whooping on the Sixers. That game turned on its head pretty quickly as far as the crowd was obviously there and hyped up, but then when the Sixers started playing so poorly, then the boos were coming out, but the boos weren't for Ben Simmons. The boos were for their own team on the basketball floor. So yeah, just when you kind of look at this matchup and sort of the firepower that the Sixers will be missing tonight, just how do you sort of see this? What kind of answers, like you said, there's no one really that can guard Ben Simmons, but just what are the Sixers going to have to try to cobble together to be able to compete in this game?
It's two things. Tobias Harris is a guy who, keeps begging. I shouldn't say begging, but, he wants a larger role, right?
Yeah.
He needs to be that guy. He wants to prove that he can do something. Well, Tobias, tonight is your night.
Mm-hmm.
I mean, you're going to get the opportunity to show exactly what you can do to a point where you're probably going to be exhausted afterwards, right? Another person I think that the Sixers are going to have to depend on a lot is Shake Milton. And, Shake Milton is a guy that it was several years ago, and Doc knows this because he was a Clippers coach, but it was several years ago where Ben Simmons didn't play, Joel Embiid didn't play, and the only starter who finished the game, regular starter, was Tobias Harris. And Shake Milton had a phenomenal game. He scored 39 points, and they almost beat the Clippers. So I feel like in order for the Sixers to have success, Shake Milton, whatever he had in that water bottle or something like that night, or whatever he did,
Secret sauce.
He's going to have to do the same exact thing because I feel like Shake and Tobias are going to have phenomenal games for the 76ers to win tonight.
Yeah, obviously Tobias Harris also has been hurt recently. He missed the last 2 games with hip soreness, but was listed as probable to play and said yesterday after practice that he was expecting to play tonight. And Shake Milton has stepped into a much bigger role with the injuries to James Harden and Tyrese Maxey and has played pretty well in that game and a half that he's had a much bigger role. But let's circle this back to Ben Simmons just because that is such the hot topic heading into this game. Like I mentioned before, Keith, you were in Brooklyn on Sunday for the Nets final game before coming to Philly. You were in those press conferences. You can read Keith's story on Inquirer.com/Sixers. And it seemed like, and I could say it's sort of, in reading it, reminded me of when Simmons went on JJ Redick's podcast right before the season started, and that there seemed to be kind of a lightness to him, or a sense of, not a sense of humor, but just a willingness to kind of have some fun with the moment as far as coming back here. Obviously, he talked after shoot around today as well at the Wells Fargo Center, and you were there. Just as someone who's covered Ben Simmons since he was drafted by the Sixers, just how would you describe kind of his demeanor, what you've observed from him, at this point in the season with such a huge benchmark on the calendar now?
That's a great question. The best way to describe it is he's finally embracing the moment. And when you look at it, in Philadelphia, he was vilified. Even earlier this season when he struggled, he was vilified in New York. And now he's looking at it like, hey, I done hit rock bottom. I'm just going to embrace it. He's playing with more confidence. And I feel like coming to Philly, he knows he's going to get booed. He knows they're going to say things to him. So he's kind of making light of the situation and basically embracing it. Like he knows what's going to happen. But also, I feel like he is playing with more confidence. And let's face it, he knows that the 76ers right now don't have anyone on this roster who can stop them from getting to the cup. And with that being said, there does become a little bit more bravado on saying what I'm going to do, and it's all about the team. So I feel like that the main thing is he's embracing the moment, and also he realizes that, we got a great chance of winning, and I'm gonna have the last laugh against the Sixers fans.
Yeah, and obviously it's been a very strange season for Brooklyn in general, with all the stuff that's been surrounding that team, especially in the last couple of weeks. And Ben Simmons not playing well to start the season was a large part of all those narratives and all those storylines, around this team. But like you said, Ben has been playing a lot better the last couple of games, and certainly this game kind of arrives at the right time for him to sort of cross this threshold in the saga that has been the Ben Simmons 76ers situation. And I guess as a another question on this topic, I had a friend actually text me earlier today and was like, is this when the hatchet finally gets buried? Like, is this when we, cross this bridge and it's not that it's never going to be a thing anymore, it's always going to be a thing, but is this when the hatchet is finally buried? And I kind of was like, I don't think so, because Joel Embiid is not playing in this game, and not that there aren't stakes, there's always stakes in any NBA game, but it just isn't going to feel the way that we thought it was going to feel at the beginning of the season. But really the Embiid layer, I feel like, is what's missing. Do you agree with that, or do you think this will be kind of a big moment to kind of get past something tonight?
Well, to put it this way, I think it has to be a big moment to get past it, because we're looking at everyone's talking about Ben Simmons, and Ben Simmons right now isn't the problem. I mean, the Sixers have greater problems than dealing with Ben Simmons, or Ben Simmons saying, I don't want to play with y'all anymore, right?
Yeah.
So even when Joel Embiid plays, and we know their relationship, how strained it was, but even when he comes back, I think like the more that the Sixers focus on Ben Simmons, and it's more as the fans focus on Ben Simmons, is one of those things where they're not attacking the things that they need to attack. So if I'm Doc Rivers, and Gina, look, you've been at practice, and whenever we ask them questions, they always say, hey, we moved on, right?
Yep.
So after this game, like sweet Ben, like, if you got to burn his jersey or do whatever you have to do it, because like, again, the team is 8-8. The team is struggling. The top three players aren't playing in the game. They have a tough stretch coming up. They need to forget about Ben and just bury it. Seriously, I kind of agree with your friend.
No, that's fair. And yeah, we obviously at practice yesterday, Tobias Harris was asked about it. He downplayed it. Doc Rivers was asked about it. He initially downplayed it, and then sort of did reveal a little bit of himself as a former player, saying, yeah, if Ben Simmons is being on the other side is more motivation, I would understand it. That's how I would take it as a player if I were playing in this game, paraphrasing, but that was the gist of his comments. So there'll definitely be some juice on both sides tonight. But yeah, it'll be interesting if this, when Joel finally plays in a game, if these teams match up in the playoffs. It's going to always be a thing, but yeah, tonight definitely is a big step. But you brought up a great point as far as the Sixers having much greater problems than Ben Simmons or his return or all the hubbub surrounding this game, because they're 8-8, like you mentioned. We're almost to, the conventional wisdom is like the 20 game mark is when you can start to evaluate where a team is at, because you're about a quarter of the way through the season. They will basically hit that this weekend or early next week. And so many guys are hurt right now, like we said, with Embiid. We don't know how long that injury is going to linger. James Harden is probably still out for a week and a half to 2 weeks with that foot injury. And then Tyrese Maxey had a foot fracture over the weekend against the Bucks, and he's expected to miss about a month. So kind of looking at the overall state of this team, we talked about what they need to do tonight to try to win, but just even moving forward for really, I had one of our colleagues who covers the Nets asked me, like, when is this team going to be whole again? And I said about a month, because that's when Tyrese Maxey will be back. So we're talking Christmas. We're talking start of 2023. How are they going to need to get by just overall? You talked about Tobias Harris and Shake Milton and their roles increasing, but just looking big picture, or at least kind of at this next month of the season, this next chunk, how are they going to tread water right now, just given all the injuries and sort of the issues that have already popped up in the early season?
In the immediate future, until James gets back, I think that they're going to have to share the ball.
Yeah.
I mean, the things that Doc Rivers says, and I know it sounds like, okay, cliche-ish or so easy to say, but honestly, they need balance. They need to spread the ball. They need to play team basketball in order for them to win. Because, you look at it, they're going to go into a lot of games and they're going to be the underdog just because, Tobias right now is the only starter. Well, him and
PJ Tucker, yeah.
But PJ isn't really an offensive player. He's
Nope.
a role player. So they're going to have to do it. They're going to have to get it like guys like Shake, guys like Furkan, for instance. A guy who didn't even play in the first 5 games is going to have to come in and run the offense. He's going to have to hit some timely shots. And I think that these guys have to dig deep and play as if, like, a lot of them are on their final year of their deal, and they're going to have to play like, hey, we want to impress people and show them that we can play team ball and be in this league, because it's rough. Now, once James Harden comes back, I think that is going to get a little bit easier for them, just because of his star power. Mm-hmm. And I feel like that's going to free more things up for guys like Shake and Tobias. But until then, I think that, it has to be we basketball, not me, but we basketball for them to win these games.
Yeah, and again, we don't know how long Joel Embiid is going to be out with his foot injury. We know it's going to be tonight against the Nets, quick turnaround back-to-back in Charlotte tomorrow, and then the Sixers said he'll be reevaluated after that. So maybe he comes back at some point on the road trip after Charlotte. They go to Orlando to play 2 games against the Magic, back home against the Atlanta Hawks on Monday, and then right back out on the road. So like you said, this is kind of a tough stretch, at least from a travel perspective or a road perspective. We're coming off a stretch where they've played a lot of games at home in the month of November, and now things aren't going to get any easier. But yeah, it was interesting talking to guys over the last couple of days as these injuries have kind of mounted. And when the Sixers had their offseason and had their free agency period, obviously the draft night trade to get DeAnthony Melton, we all talked about how the depth was the big thing that increased, that they got better players who could come off the bench. And, now guys that were part of the rotation previously were sort of further down the bench. And like you mentioned, not playing nearly as many minutes. And you hear the cliche a lot that, bench players talk about, stay ready so you don't have to get ready. And that's going to be put to the test today, and moving forward, as far as just really, okay, you didn't get to play a lot in the early season. Now you're getting your opportunity to do so, and how do you make the most out of that opportunity? So yeah, that is guys from Shake Milton, who's now starting, to Furkan Korkmaz, who's probably going to be back either tonight or soon, and these guys that are used to playing a lot are finally going to get to play again and potentially prove why they were playing initially, and that maybe they deserve minutes, or could potentially even, we'll talk about this in a minute, be trade chips if they want to try to improve the roster.
Yeah, I agree. I agree with you 100%. But this is one thing that I'm a little concerned about right now for the 76ers. And it's kind of like when we looked at the first 5 games or 6 games when they had all their players, like the chemistry just looked bad. Like, you look at, like, you see Joel, you see James, they didn't look like a great fit whatsoever, right? The defense was a struggle, and they had some recent success. And now all of a sudden, when you think that you're about to incorporate James back in, Tyrese and Joel go down. And the scary part is, it's like December is when teams are like, you definitely know exactly who you have.
Yep.
Whereas the Sixers are going to be starting all over again from scratch, trying to figure out how Joel and James can play better together. How can some of these role players, get their niche? How can you get PJ Tucker more involved? How can Tobias get involved when he's playing on the team with the other guys as a fourth option? So to me, that's the scarier thing for me if I'm Doc Rivers, not knowing like what type of team that I have. And you're not going to know until January. And,
Right.
and that's a scary thing if I was a coach of the Sixers.
Right. A coach of the Sixers, or potentially Daryl Morey, who obviously is the one who put this roster together and will be relied upon to tinker with it. And when we sort of look, you mentioned December, and that's also another big time in the NBA calendar, because when you sort of look at the overall path forward now for this team, December 15th is the date that a lot of players can be traded. January 15th for some other guys, depending on the type of contract they've signed. But yeah, it's like, are we going to know what this team has and what it doesn't have, and kind of look forward, because Daryl Morey is always looking to make moves and to tinker with the roster, and obviously he pulled off a huge deal at the trade deadline last year. But are we going to know do you already have a sense of like what this team needs when you look at maybe an extra guard, because Doc Rivers talks about the lack of ball handling right now, or you look at the center position, and we're going to see it tonight. The Sixers are going to go real small with PJ Tucker and Montrezl Harrell and Paul Reed. None of those guys are, natural centers in a lot of capacities. So when you look at the holes already on this roster, what the injuries and the guys who are playing now, just, in a month from now or 3 weeks from now, are we already going to start talking about trades and moves and things that this team needs to do?
Yeah, it's funny because, like you said, Daryl Morey is always trying to look for a trade. I do think that they do have to adjust this roster. Right now, I wouldn't like the one person who we talk about being traded the most is Tobias Harris.
Yep, you wrote about that earlier.
Yeah, we wrote about that. I wouldn't trade him right now until people come back, right? Because you need the offense. But when you look at this roster, everything stays the same, like the needs that they have. They don't have a ball handler, a backup ball handler out to James Harden. Nothing against Tyrese Maxey, and nothing against DeAnthony Melton. I think Tyrese Maxey is a phenomenal 2-guard combo guard, but when you ask him to run an offense, he's thinking too much. You know what I mean? He's more of a scorer than a distributor. So I don't like him in that role. I also think, and I do like DeAnthony Melton, but I also think that he's better utilized as a third guard off the bench. He's not a starting point guard. I mean, let's face it, this is a guy who played power forward in high school, right? So he's not that. So I think they do need to get a pure point guard, someone who can pick guys in better positions. Secondly, whenever Joel Embiid goes off the floor, the other team goes on a run. It's kind of like a sprint to the rim. Who can get there to the fastest? The other team's bigs, right? Right now, you look at Paul Reed. We call him B-ball Paul. He's 6'9". He's more of a power forward. And then you look at Montrezl Harrell, who's 6'7". He can get buckets, but he's a defensive liability. So right now, I think that the 76ers, they need a backup center. They need to go out there and get somebody with some length, someone who can protect the rim, but they also need a ball handler, someone who can get others the ball and keep Joel happy, because right now I think Maxey, we're asking of him to do too much. And I just feel like at times, and I'm not trying to be critical, but I feel like at times the moment is too big for DeAnthony Melton.
Yeah, and those are two young players, like you said, two not natural point guards, and yeah, they're not James Harden. They're not a dude that is second in the NBA in assists or whatever he is right now, and a future Hall of Famer and perennial All-Star who's always been a great facilitator, even as he's been a scoring champ and all that stuff. So yeah, and I mean, we mentioned kind of these dates that guys can be traded or the trade market kind of opens up a little bit more, but the Sixers do have an open roster spot right now, and they've had that basically since the season started when they waived guys like Isaiah Joe and Charles Bassey and Charlie Brown, and they like kind of left that open by design. And Doc Rivers was asked when Tyrese went down, as far as, okay, is that what you're going to look to do to find another guard? And he said, not quite yet. We're not panicking, but that's an option as well, is that they could just sign someone that's out there on the market right now.
Yeah, and the reason I think a lot, the reason why Doc, well, not think, but the reason why Doc said what he said is because you don't want to hurry up and sign someone and then realize the person that you really wanted becomes available after the fact. So a lot of times teams hold out. It's kind of like going clothes or shopping for a car. You go see a car and it's really nice and you love it, but then next thing you know, you want to go to the other dealership to see what they have. And I think is on the lines of that. So like right now, yes, it's great. You got to fulfill a need, but there are going to be certain guys that teams are looking at and they're going to want to dump salaries. They're going to want to do other things. So it might be best to wait and hold off. But you are right. That is a huge option. And sometimes you understand why the Sixers did that, because it makes them, they have more roster flexibility now.
Yep.
But right now, tonight, they probably wish that they had an extra guy who can go out there and play.
No doubt, no doubt. Well, before we go, let's kind of just circle this back to the Ben Simmons situation, because, like I said, that's the big topic tonight. And the trade was about 9 months ago now, and when you look back on this trade, and it's still, I think, too early to fully evaluate it, but when you do look back on everything that led up to the deadline, the deal that happens, James Harden is here. Ben Simmons is now with the Nets. Seth Curry is now with the Nets. Go down the line. Just kind of how do you view it at this point, with understanding that obviously it's still very, very early in this trade and as far as everything coming together, but how do you view this trade now, several months later?
It's a crazy trade because the Sixers had to give up so much.
Yeah, draft picks, all that. Yeah.
I mean, they gave up draft picks. They gave up Ben, another starter, and the backup center and draft picks. And then they got James, and now James isn't playing. It's one of those things where it's hard to say who won. It's also hard to say who lost the trade. Like right now, some people may say if Ben has a great game tonight, they're going to say Ben won. But I think that when you have these two teams, they made this move to win championships, both of them. So I think that whoever goes further in the playoffs or whoever can get closer to the championship is going to be the winner. But you can make a case and say at one point when you looked at James Harden, how he played last year, you're like, oh my gosh, the Sixers were had. James struggled. But then he came back this year. He's not quite the old James Harden, but he's trending towards that more so than he was like playing last year. But then you look at Ben, and was coming off the bench, and the last 3 games he looked great. But the only reason why he started 2 nights ago is because Nick Claxton had a personal reason. So this is a tough one, Gina. The judge, I would really like to get your opinion on that one.
Yeah, I mean, I will be really curious to see what James Harden looks like when he comes back from his injury, because you could see, and it sounds cliche, but we heard all offseason about how much he was able to finally work on his conditioning and work on himself and not have to worry about the hamstring and just rehabbing that. And like you said, you could see the ramifications of that, or you could see the difference in him, just in his explosion, his shot. Obviously, he was still a terrific facilitator all of that was in a good place. And so also, like you mentioned, sometimes the fit with Embiid has looked clunky, even though they were the best pick and roll duo last season with all of that. And so we all we heard during training camp was we're going to finally be able to like put games together and figure this out, and there's going to be some experimentation and some things that don't work, but we're going to figure out the right balance. And now everything's been pushed back, a month or however long both guys are out, and even if one is playing but the other isn't, you're not able to work on it. And so how long is that going to take? I mean, again, the season is long. We're only on game 17 out of 82 tonight, and we've seen teams turn it around. Boston Celtics are a great example of that, where they look like they were dead in the water this time last year and then go on to go to the NBA Finals. So certainly there's time to figure that out, but I wonder how it's all going to work, because the best laid plans, as the adage goes. So yeah, that's going to just, how long does it take for this team to be whole, and is it enough time to compete with teams like Boston, like Milwaukee, even some other teams that are coming up in the Eastern Conference that maybe have had more continuity and more time to be ready for a long playoff run, considering everything that's on the table.
Yeah, I agree with you 100%. And one thing I also think that we talk about, they need a backup point guard, and they also need a backup big. But you know what, Gina, a guy they're really missing is a person that people don't talk about a lot, and is Danny Green. I mean, because Danny Green was a guy who basically would be a great fourth option on this team, like a guy who can stick a three, a guy who can defend, a guy who's a winner, a leader. You know what I mean? He's not a star, but he's a great fourth option because he's a role player who won a championship. And I feel like DeAnthony Melton can blossom into that role, but when you look at the starting lineup, that's what they're missing. They need to get a guy like that who can be comfortable in his skin, not getting the ball, but whenever called upon, he's going to make shots and he's going to defend.
Yeah, I think we thought PJ Tucker was going to be that guy, as far as like the intangible glue guy, championship pedigree, all that. And not saying he can't turn into that, but he hasn't quite done that yet. Just, I think, because of the injury that he's coming off of, the knee surgery in the off season, all of that. So again, there's potential for it to all grow into things, but yeah, it's just hard to kind of see the path right now with what is also in the Eastern Conference. And the question of, are the Sixers any closer to winning a title now than they were at this time last year? I don't know the answer to that question. I don't know if they're further away, but I don't know if they're any closer as well.
Yeah, I don't think they're any closer just as at this particular time, not with this roster that they currently have. I don't see it right now. I don't see it. I just don't see it.
Right. Well, before we go, any final thoughts on tonight, what you're expecting? Again, the arena's very quiet right now. You can see people working behind me, but as you say, it's the calm before the storm. It's going to be pretty rowdy here in a few hours.
I expect that Ben Simmons is going to get booed, of course, right? But I expect that Ben Simmons is going to have a big game. I do. I think it's set up for him. It really is. There's no one there who can stop him. I think he's going to have a big game. I think that his teammates are going to rally behind him and support him. And we're going to see guys basically, passing up shots so they can feed Ben. And so he can just, be the villain or whatever and silence the crowd. That's what I think is going to happen.
Yeah, well, it's certainly going to be interesting, and I'm sure some of you who are watching right now are going to be here in a couple of hours, and hope you have a great time. But thank you all so much for joining us on Inquirer Live at GameDay Central. Head over to inquirer.com/Sixers GameDay for the latest on tonight's matchup between the Sixers and Nets. GameDay Central is the destination for fans and reporters to connect before and during the game. I'm your host, Gina Mizell, Sixers beat reporter for the Philadelphia Inquirer. We hope to see you here again on the next Inquirer Live. Happy Thanksgiving to everybody, and enjoy the game tonight. Thank you.